All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode. We are really diving in lately more into the coercive control conversation. And, I think that there's still a lot of awareness that needs to happen around it, but also the practical things that people can do if they do find themselves in a coercive control situation. So I want to welcome our guest today, Jennifer Parker. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me and for all the work that you do, by the way.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. It really does take a village.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yes. So we're just going to go ahead and dive in. Certainly, if people want to connect with you, learn more about the work you're doing, check out your book, they certainly can do that in the show notes. Um, but let's dive in. Let's start with the definition of coercive control.
Yes. I like I like using coercive control because people don't always understand what controlling behavior is. They may not be in a domestic abuse. They may not be married to someone. So it's a really good term, and it means a pattern of behavior that dominates an intimate partner, that uses power and control, and they do that through imposing fear, dependency, and uh, just really causing them to doubt themselves, kind of using crazy making that kind of behavior. So they
Yeah.
can do it with physical things, certainly, physical and sexual abuse, but a lot of it is emotional, mental, spiritual kinds of abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that from the work that we've been doing and stuff that I, see, unfortunately, I know that a lot of these folks will also use, um, they'll reach out to people in the network. They'll try to get allies with friends, people at
Yes,
school. They're trying to build as much of that as possible, that really kind of helps isolate the person that is being controlled.
definitely, definitely. And that's not something that you expect in your intimate partner, right? To get other people to ally against you. And so that's a big part of coercive control, is using things that aren't about love, aren't about respect, and so forth, which is what we expect from our intimate partners.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that the coercive piece, right, is they're masterful and very strategic in how they're communicating, and that it's positioned in a way that really seems like, well, it's in this person's best interest, or, whatever, when at the end of the day, you know,
Sometimes, yeah.
sometimes that's not really the case, right?
One of the 12 methods of coercive control that I talk about in my book is the first one is seduction. It's like, yeah, it doesn't look like anything is wrong. If they want to give you input into picking out all of your clothes, for instance, or if they want to, gee, I want to spend all my time with you, that kind of thing. And then slowly they become more and more isolated.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I know that, this is a topic that I have certainly seen more and more of. And I'm glad that we're talking about it, because I think this is also a really good opportunity for awareness for people that are working in this space, the attorneys and the financial folks and whatever. And I think at the end of the day, if people said, hey, do you work with, narcissists? Do you work with people who are, controlling? And they all are like, oh yeah, we do that all the time.
Mm.
But they may not have some additional training. They might not have the right team of people. And I have seen people be further victimized because people don't understand that the words that they're even saying
Mm-hmm.
are impacting the situation. Have you seen that as well, Jennifer?
I definitely have seen that. It is so important for people to go to to have the right team. And I love how you talk about teams. But to, first of all, if they think that this is going on in their lives, to find an advocate, a therapist, friend, whoever it might be, who understands what they're going through. Because what happens with coercive control is it's so easy to begin to doubt yourself, especially if you're only hearing from somebody who's coercively controlling, if you become that isolated. And then to develop that support group further, to ask for referrals if you are going through a divorce. Who are some divorce attorneys you would recommend? These people who are actually experts with coercive control. Because I've seen too many attorneys who don't completely get it. It's like, oh yeah, I know what coercive control is, but they don't really understand how to handle the kinds of things that happen, the dynamics that they use in court. the really tricky things.
Oh,
And
it's
not be
awful.
prepared for that. And they may be uh, an much like a survivor of an intimate partner relationship. You go into the relationship expecting normal behavior, right? Expecting respect. And so the attorneys may also not quite get their clients are going to be receiving, and not be able to properly support them with that or protect them from that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, absolutely. Well, and I just happened to go to a temporary order hearing with a client on Friday, and that's exactly, I mean, I left there, Jennifer, absolutely beside myself because
Yeah,
the guardian ad litem was part of it. He lied on the stand. He had some really uh I think he's probably facilitating and probably has his own coercive control mindset on feeling like he's in charge and he's got all this power and whatever. Long story short, we were going to keep status quo on placement for the children because I mean, probably one of the worst situations we the team have seen. And the GAL was recommending increasing placement time. Well, he backpedaled during the hearing, and then after the hearing was over, he submitted his recommended order to the court within an hour of us leaving.
wow.
And so he's facilitating that. Then the other attorney, opposing counsel, was speaking in a way that was essentially blaming my client for stuff that really wasn't her fault. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is going on here? And we were in person because that was part of the strategy from the attorney, which was awesome. Everybody else was on Zoom. So we're sitting in front of the commissioner. And I'm kind of in the galley area in the back. And I'm sitting there thinking, you have got to be kidding me. Like, I'm not a very good poker face. I'm not very good at poker because I'm like, what is going on here? Like you're trying to keep it together and you're like, you can't even make this stuff up. And then I think it's good confirmation for people that are going into these situations when you can have somebody, kind of an outside person, right, that comes with you that can say, listen, you are not crazy. The fact that you got upset, and started feeling emotional, totally legitimate. And he was lying on the stand.
Right.
Like, this is a serious problem. And so I think that, again, kind of what we're going to be talking about on things that they can do, let's start with developing those relationships, because I think it's a good segue from what we were talking about here is finding those people that can be advocates for you, that can help you, but you've got your network of friends and support folks, right? But then you also need those professionals that are also going to be able to be part of, that support as well.
Definitely. And sometimes family and friends intend well, but they don't get it. They don't understand. So they may actually end up kind of blaming the victim some more. It's like, well, how come you're not working on your relationship harder? Or, what could you be doing that might deserve this? So not really necessarily out of toxic behavior themselves, but just not understanding. So very important to have those people. Maybe a support group. Belonging to a support group can be really helpful if you have one in your community. But definitely having advocates and therapists and attorneys who understand what's going on. There's lots of online information as well, that isolation is your worst enemy. Being isolated and only getting feedback from the coercive controller, because that just creates self-doubt. It's inevitable. It's like, well, am I crazy here? I think all of us would have a really difficult time with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a lot of times when clients will say, but my spouse said this. And I'm like, that's actually not true. Or part of it's true, but that's not fully how this is going to work, right? So they start to really try to control the narrative, and especially on the financial side, right? Like when you have somebody who maybe hasn't been as involved in the finances or things like that, they don't necessarily know what they don't know. So they're like, okay, well, yeah, maybe that's true. I'm not really sure, and so, developing those relationships, having the experts, having that support team. Sometimes I know like some of the communities have, domestic violence centers or, advocacy groups that can help with some of those kinds of things. I mean, one of the folks from the Waukesha Women's Center, which is in the county that I live in, did actually end up meeting us at the courthouse as this ancillary, support. And again, we're not saying anything, we're not talking, we're there as a support person, a support team for the client. And
but you're there to help them process afterwards what they've
yes,
gone
that's
through.
right. That's right. Yep. And that's exactly it. Because we were in a conference room prior, went in, and then came back to the conference room after, and we were able to debrief. I mean, I can't imagine being in that spot and trying to process everything that happened. And then you're thinking, what just happened? And there were good things that happened in the hearing itself. Even despite their bad behavior, there were good outcomes from the commissioner. But then you've got this underhanded move after the fact, and you're like, no, this is just not okay.
And that can be very triggering for people who've already been through a lot of trauma, and they might lose track of the good things that are happening because that is like, here it is, here I am again, here it is again. So
yeah,
it's very important to have that support.
And I think there's a false sense of, I'm doing a series on this false sense of fill in the blank. And one of the things that I think people fall into is this false sense of justice and feeling like the court system really is going to protect them from, bad behavior. And quite frankly, they're probably not going to protect. And they're also, in some cases, almost like feeding into it.
Unfortunately, yes. It's really difficult it feels like it's broken in some ways. But one of the things I like to say when I'm working with clients is that the court is an objective process. They're there to be objective. That isn't going to feel so good because it's not going to feel like they're on your side, which is really what you want. But you need these other people who are on your side and can help you in terms of processing. But you wouldn't, just as you don't want the judge or the commissioner, whoever it is, to just believe your partner and what they have to say. They can't just believe you too. And so they need to understand that process in order to help them to not be as triggered. But the other unfortunate thing is that unfortunately, and I think maybe this is what was going on with the GAL, still in our society, men tend to be believed before women. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that still can happen, and it's very unintentional maybe, but it's very damaging.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that kind of goes into the conversation around picking your team, right? I mean, there might be times when strategically you're like, okay, do I go with a male or female attorney? Well, let's talk about that. Let's interview both and see who resonates, but then also be strategic, right, around who's going to be the best fit for your situation. And unfortunately, we do have to be considering those things.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
And
it depends too on your judge or your commissioner and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. So first thing is, developing those relationships, right? The close team of people, that inner circle, the right team of people that can be advocating, that understand coercive control. And it's not even that we necessarily, I feel like for me, I'm not a coercive control expert, but I see it and I know the resources and I know enough to say, no. Good. So the next one that I know, and I love this one. Okay, so talk to us about the behavior. What is the next practical tip?
Definitely. You want to pay attention to their behavior, not just their words. And especially if you haven't quite decided if you're going to divorce or whatever, it's really tempting to pay attention to their words when they make promises. Oh, I'm going to change. Oh, I'm going to, divide things 50-50, that kind of thing. And then they go back on that. So pay attention to their behavior. And it's so important because if they're saying to you, oftentimes victims get drawn back into the relationship. Let's say if the other partner does not want the divorce, and they get drawn back in with these promises, and then they get hurt all over again. So great if they say, I'm going to change, but you want to see, is their behavior that is action behavior oriented, that they're actually looking for somebody to help them change, that they're actually changing their behavior in some ways? Because if they're coming back to you saying, with the same old coercive kinds of behavior when they don't like something that you're doing, that's evidence they're not changing. So
yeah,
attention to the behavior.
Right. I mean, this is such a powerful concept that can be applied in so many different ways, right? I see this playing out when women have decided that they want to move forward with a divorce, but they're trying to figure out what pathway do they go. And their spouse will say, well, we should do mediation. And I say to them, okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's look at the past patterns, the past behaviors. And if it has been very difficult and there hasn't been this very clear distinction and change of behavior, women go into it thinking, well, this is going to be different, right? Well, we've got 20 years of bad behavior and now we think we're going to be able to mediate. Like, this is not happening, right?
Right.
So we have to take an honest, painful, transparent look at those past behaviors. And a lot of times I'll see, oh, well, we went to, counseling for, 3 times and now he's done. Well, there you go. Like, oh, I don't need it anymore. I'm good. Well, really?
That's
Where's the commitment? No.
That old expression, turn over a new leaf, is not how change happens.
Yes, I know, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we wish we could, but it's not quite that simple. We got to put in the work, right? And we need to see that their commitment is genuine.
Exactly.
I can't say enough about this because I think, again, women want to come to the table and really truly believe. Most of the women that reach out to me, they don't really want to get divorced. They really want to believe that their spouse is going to change.
Exactly. They love them. They still love them oftentimes. And so it's really hard to take that more, it feels like a hard-nosed approach, but yet the evidence suggests that you need to be, if they've been treating you that way, you need to be looking at, have they really changed? And for instance, sometimes when there is a separation, they might hear from their partners, oh, I can't live without you, and sort of, making signs that perhaps they're going to commit suicide. Well, it's right to be concerned. Call 911 on them.
Yeah.
Other than that, don't let that draw you back in, because you can love somebody and still hold them accountable.
Yeah.
And not fall for those kinds of things. Because
yeah.
Really, a lot of times you have to translate what they're saying through their belief system.
Yep.
Their belief system is they're entitled. Okay. And so if they say, I love you and I'm going to change, it's like, no, I'm just doing what I need to do in order to keep you and draw you back in. And then it'll go back to how it was.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, I'm really glad that you mentioned that because I do see that often. Not every day, right? But often where there is this, like, they're very concerned about how fragile, right, their partner, their spouse seems, right, around this whole situation. And they are genuinely concerned. And so it is impacting their decision making because they care about that person, right? And don't probably want to feel like they're responsible for some of their decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And they're not responsible.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Which leads to another really important point. It's just, their behavior is not a reflection on you. Any coercive control they do, any of the abuse, it doesn't mean anything about you as a person. If I'm speaking to somebody who's been victimized, they are not actually, and victim is not their identity. I also like to say that. Usually people don't like to think of themselves as victims. So they've been victimized by someone.
Right.
It's not their identity is that they're a victim.
That's right.
And so the reflection, it's a reflection. Their behavior is a reflection on them and their beliefs, what they think they're entitled to. And generally speaking, if they're using coercive control, they're not capable of empathy, at least not for you in that situation. It's like me first. I used to work with someone who did a lot of abuser treatment, and he had this handout that was sort of like the toddler's creed, which abusers adhere to. And it's like, me first, and if it's yours, it's mine, and kind of thing. I mean, they really kind of of that kind of set of beliefs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, and I think the other part too is, like, if there are people that are listening that, again, it's always easier to see when somebody else is going through something, right? But, if we know somebody who's in that space that we can see as being coercively controlled, right? What's something that, the people that are in their circle can do to help them?
I think the most important thing is to listen to not to judge, but to be there, to make it clear to them they're there to listen, to ask them questions about what it is, how they're feeling, what it is they want. They may not know what they want at that point, other than they want it to stop. But not to expect that they have to make any quick decisions, but to just be there for support. That is so important. Trauma specialists say that the most important thing that determines how healing being able to occur is their relational score. They have some way in which they measure that, but it's the kinds of relationships they have. You have people who can do that for you. And I know it's really hard. It can be hard for therapists too, if you feel like somebody's in danger, to not say, oh, you got to leave kind of thing. But yet that just does not serve them. They're told all the time what to do by the abusive person. And so it's important to support them in developing that themselves, give them resources because they may not know them. If you know of a community organization or a book or something like that, but just to really be there to listen and support.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, the other part of it too is I have always said, women have a very high tolerance for putting up with stuff, right? And then once they finally reach that point where they're finally done, they're usually done. But unfortunately, it isn't without usually a lot of going back, right?
That's right. I think the norm is like 5 or 6 times in terms of, at least in your head, if not actually leaving and coming back.
Yeah, it's hard. And, but no, I think these are all some really great, practical things that people can do. Tell us the name of your book.
Coercive Relationships, Find the Answers You Seek. And I actually named it that because they're looking for answers. They're looking for answers to the whys. And so my book actually gives some direction in terms of why so many intimate partners would feel like they can do this. But it also gives a lot of opportunities for reflection, a lot of information that helps people to begin the healing process.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's fantastic. And we'll include the link in the show notes. But thank you for your time today. Thanks for having a candid conversation around something that I know resonates deeply with a lot of our listeners. And so I just want to thank you for your time today. As we wrap up, I would love for you to just leave, final thought, quote, something that you'd really just want to make sure that the women that are listening leave with.
Okay. Well, I kind of have 2 things. One is a quote, but the other is, as painful as this is, to know that this can also be a process of really big growth. I know that happened for me in my own divorce many, many years ago. It's like it was a process of growth for me. And that is growth. It's not the way we want to grow, but unfortunately, it often is the way we grow. And it is growth you will take with you forever and can use throughout your life. And the quote that I have to offer is actually from Cynthia Ocelli, I think is how her name is pronounced, but I may have this wrong. But it is a quote that actually a survivor brought to me one time. And it is, for a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction. Well, that's what it feels like to people who are going through this oftentimes. And so this particular person who brought it to me, it had been inspiring for her. And so I want to leave people with that.
Absolutely.
To know that right now it might not feel like you're growing, but that growth can happen.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, what a great note to end on. I want to thank you for your time today, sharing your wisdom and your insight. And I look forward to connecting with our listeners during our next episode as well.